Welcome to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. Our goal is to help you maximize your church's potential. You'll hear from top leaders in children's, student, and family ministry about the principles and practices they use. Now here's your host, Nick Blevins.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 81 of the podcast. I'm Nick, I'm your host, and in today's episode, I talk with Rachel Walker, and we talk about launching a ministry from scratch. Now, some of you probably know of Rachel. She is the person behind the scenes on the podcast. She helps put it together. She helps create a lot of the resources that we share on my site. And she hosted episode 53 where we did like a Q&A, and I just answered a bunch of questions that you all submitted. But this time we put Rachel on the hot seat, and we talk about what it's been like for her to launch a children's ministry from scratch as part of a church plant. Now, you may not be launching anything anytime soon, but if you are launching a ministry, a campus, a church plant, this will be really helpful to you. If you're not, you may want to listen anyway. Now, I fully admit, I don't expect everybody to listen to every episode of this podcast, especially since we bounce around from children's ministry to student ministry to family ministry to, different specific topics to more broad things. I mean, I expect people to pick and choose. However, whether you're launching something or not, you might want to listen to this episode, or especially if you want to fast forward near the end. She talks about how she has put in coaches, volunteer coaches, and a leadership team, again, from scratch. So this is a brand new children's ministry. So if you've thought, man, I want to add coaches or I need a leadership team, you can listen to her talk about how she's done it, even in a church plant where, there's not as many volunteers as there is maybe in an established church or a larger church. So before we jump into the interview, though, I want to let you know about my friend Terrace Crawford is offering a coaching group for youth ministry leaders. It's a 1-year coaching program. You can find out about it at youthmencoaching.com. This isn't like a paid advertisement or anything. Terrace is a good friend. I'm a big believer in coaching. In fact, if you listen to this when it comes out, I am in Atlanta getting coaching myself and getting poured into, and I'm paying for that coaching just like this group costs. And I know these things aren't cheap. That's certainly an issue when it comes up to a coaching program or a mastermind group or something like that. And this one's year long, 15 people. It's limited. Obviously, it's a lot of access to Terrace and David Olshine who are leading it. I mean, I understand cost gets in the way of that. I just and if you can't do it, but I just encourage everybody to get coaching somehow. How can you get in a coaching group, a mastermind group, a network with other leaders? Every price point's not going to work for every person. But what I will say, and I always say, is I've never regretted any dollar I've spent in coaching. The money that I'm spending this week to get coaching, I won't regret. And so I think it's worth it. Nothing has helped me grow like coaching networks. And so if you're in youth ministry, you might want to check this out, youthmencoaching.com. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. But you have to apply by mid-December, I think it is. So you'll want to jump on that soon. But let's go ahead now and jump into my interview with Rachel Walker about launching a ministry from scratch. Well, it's great to have Rachel Walker back on the podcast, but this time as a guest. Welcome, Rachel.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So give us an introduction for anyone who may not have listened to the Q&A podcast we did. I want to say it was episode 53. I know it started year 2, so I think it was episode 53. And that because, especially, even if they did listen to it, a lot has changed. You're in a new state, at a different church. A lot of different things have happened. So kind of give us an introduction and an update on what's going on in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Like Nick said, I'm Rachel, and I am currently the kids director for United Church, which is a church that is currently 9 weeks old tomorrow. And I spent the last year, though, in Atlanta, Georgia, as part of a leadership development program through North Point Ministries at their Gwinnett Church campus. And prior to that, I grew up at CCC, where Nick works, and served in the kids ministry there and interned there for a year. And now I'm back in that area at one of the church plants that CCC helped start.
And whatever damage we did to you while we were with us, Jeff Henderson and the crew at Gwinnett, they just worked that right out, gave you a bunch of great tools. And now you're back, helped plant a church, which is what we're going to talk about. And obviously most people listening aren't planting a church or even launching a campus, though those two will be really related here today in this conversation. But there'll be some helpful things for starting anything new, a new service, a new ministry, whatever that is. So tell us a little bit, give us some background on United Church, just 8 weeks old or whatever. Just an overview of kind of what the launch was like. Obviously, we're going to dive into children's ministry, but just tell us a little bit about United Church.
So about 2 years ago, our lead pastor, Tim, started doing a residency at CCC with the goal to possibly start a campus or plant in multiple areas. And then around December, January of last year, he landed on Owings Mills, Maryland, as the location where he wanted to launch. It's an area where I believe about 85 to 90% of the people there don't go to church. And so there's just a great need for healthy churches in that area. And so starting in January, he began building a team, started having launch team gatherings and meet and greets, just inviting people to hear his story and his desire to plant a church in that area. We started gathering more formally in April and then meeting monthly. And then in August, we had really solidified our launch team of about 100 people, adults and kids, began meeting weekly, training, and then we had 2 practice services in September and launched October 1st.
Yep, and most churches, if anybody listening has been a part of a church plant or knows of one, most of them don't have 100 people. So that was really good, really strong launch. 30-ish came from our church. And for everybody listening, just some context, we're about 30 minutes apart, roughly, maybe even 40, basically opposite sides of the Beltway of the same city. So about 30 people went, but obviously you all grew that to 100, which is not common. You know, most churches launch with 30, 40, 20, you know what I mean? Much lower, which helped. And so now you're averaging, 180, close to 200, something like that every week?
Yeah, it's about 200. We launched with 270 opening Sunday and have been about 200 consistently on the Sundays following that.
So United Church obviously had a larger launch team than most churches and has launched larger than most churches. But a lot of what we're going to talk about in starting the children's ministry applies across the board, and especially for people who are starting a church, which is not going to be many, starting a campus, starting a ministry, or even just leading their own ministry. I want to dive into what that was like, and I'll tease a little bit of what we're going to talk about later, because from the beginning, you've even put in coaches and like a volunteer leadership team, which we'll talk about that. But before we do that, what did it look like just to build the team from scratch before the church launched? How did you do that?
Well, at our launch team gatherings, we started meeting monthly in April, and I was not there for April and May, but when I got back in June, I was itching to recruit to the children's ministry team, even though we hadn't recruited any volunteers to specific teams yet. We were still really trying to build the launch team. So I just started talking with people before and after those gatherings, meeting with people. There were a lot of volunteers that came from CCC that were a core part of the children's ministry team there. And I felt a little bad stealing them from you guys, but they were an incredible asset to our team because they came already trained and excited to just build a great kids ministry. And then in July was when we had our kind of all call for whoever had officially joined the launch team to pick specific volunteer teams that they wanted to be a part of. And so our lead pastor, Tim, kind of did a pitch, and he talked all about one of our church values, which is putting others first and serving. And then everyone on the launch team was given an opportunity to sign up for a team. They were able to pick their top 3 roles. They were given a sheet that had all of the volunteer roles, all the descriptions, like one line about each role, so that they could see that, no matter what their gifts or interests were, there was a place for them. And then the following month, we came out with rosters and kind of, here's our rough draft or concept of what we think these teams are going to look like. And then we really solidified those individual volunteer teams. The goal was to train all of the different children's ministry roles individually and have a big group training. But time got away from us. Some of that was supposed to happen during our practice service time. And we ran into a lot of things with equipment, which we anticipated having trouble with equipment, but we didn't expect that it would take the amount of time that it did. And so, we're doing a lot of that training now. And, again, that's also one of the reasons why it was incredibly helpful to put in coaches right from the start, because some of the individual training that different roles take has been able to be supplied by the coaches. Cool.
So it's great to hear that. I think everybody listening is thinking, okay, so starting something's hard, because they're sitting here thinking, yeah, I wish I'd done that training too and couldn't get to that, and this got in the way. And so launching a church is much like running a church week to week, where just stuff gets in the way and things happen and you can't do everything you want to do. So you just make do with what you can. So you're still training some of those people now. Do you, I think, staff the teams kind of like you wanted? I mean, you could always use more volunteers. You want more. I know after you launched, you wanted more. But did you feel like you were in a good spot when it launched?
We did. As you said, you always think, oh, I could use more volunteers here. But I remember looking at the roster right before launch and thinking, this is a really, we are blessed. This is an incredible team. We had 3 different environments right now. So nursery, preschool, which is like 3 to 5-year-olds, and then elementary, which is kindergarten through 5th grade. And then we have a guest services kids check-in team, and all of those teams were fully staffed by the time that we launched. So we have about 30 volunteers who serve in the children's ministry right now, and they're spread across those 4 teams.
Which is great. That's a lot of people for that size church, which is really good. I'm guessing, we didn't talk about this much, but for people listening too, they've probably done this where you probably just kind of projected what you felt like you would need numbers wise, position wise, and then just said, okay, here's what we need. We need 30 people in these roles, and then recruited towards it, right?
We did something similar to that. We didn't give the team a number. We, as staff, looked at all the people who had signed up in the different roles and the different things they had listed as what they would prefer to do, and things just fell into place. So we had a few conversations with people who had expressed interest in multiple areas, and just talked with them saying, hey, if you're interested in both of these things, here's where our greatest needs are. We do have some volunteers who serve every other week in certain kids' roles, and then every other week in guest services. So I had to communicate with the person who leads the guest services team on that. But my overall goal was to have 30 volunteers for kids ministry, and we hit that right on. So that was, again, a huge blessing.
The big question is, how many fights did you have among the staff for the same people? Right? Because that happens all the time in any church context. Yeah, a few arguments, conversations. And I remember we talked about how Tim, the lead pastor, had talked with you about you have these great leaders who want to serve in children's, which is awesome, and they're trusted, and a lot of them came from our church. But he, as he should, was thinking about the whole church too, and wanted to make sure there was great leadership everywhere. That, every leader faces that. As a ministry leader, you're like, oh, I want all the best people. Give me, everyone. But it really is important to think church wide too. You want the church to be strong. So you probably had a couple people, I'm guessing, that you would love to have had on your team, serving in a different area, which is good. It's hard. It's good. How about, I'd love to talk about how you got it all going. So there's a lot to that, but you had to get equipment, supplies, curriculum. You had to set up rooms, separate from all this training and volunteer stuff. So how did you even go about that? So
I began working for United in June, and then really in July is when I started executing the plan that I laid out in June. My first step was to just meet with people. So I met with different children's ministry leaders in the area, talked with different people over the phone. I met with you. I met with Lisa Malidi, who's been on the podcast. She's the elementary director at CCC. I met with the preschool director there and just asked a lot of questions. I would go in to each meeting and have certain questions that I wanted to ask different people, and then just learned from them. I've interned in children's ministry and worked or served in 2 different churches prior to this, but there's so many questions that you don't even think about until you start actually building a ministry. And so I did that. That was so helpful. And then I continued to bug those people with questions and still do, but that was really helpful. And then I began to talk through environments with our lead pastor and the guy who was doing all of our supplies and equipment for the church, because we had to figure out, okay, how many rooms are you going to have? What different environments and ages are you going to serve? Because that affects curriculum and volunteers. And so we talked through 3 different environments. We landed on 3 rooms. Originally, we were going to do 2. It was elementary and then preschool and under. But the desire to provide a preschool room where we could really start laying the foundation and teaching and just bringing those kids and getting them ready for the elementary room just pointed us towards we really need to have 3 rooms. Nursery is 2 and under, and then preschool 3 to 5, which is where we start programming. So after talking through those environments, we began looking at what supplies and equipment that we would need. The guy that we worked with was from churchplant.com. His name was Derek. He was great. He had never really put a children's ministry environment together before. His specialty was doing an auditorium and doing guest services and lobby area. And so we had to have a lot of really specific conversations about what we wanted this children's ministry to look like. Because although we're portable, we wanted it to be safe, we wanted it to be comfortable, and we wanted it to be irresistible to kids still. So I can kind of walk you through the different rooms that we have and what that setup looks like. We do meet in a school. So every week we knew we were going to have to walk in there, get all of the tables and chairs out of the way and set stuff up quickly and welcome people and then be able to tear it down. So we decided that in our elementary room, the priority was we have pipe and drape. So we have pipe and drape. We didn't want any of the walls to be showing. We wanted it to be one solid color. And kind of a closed off area. We have 4 small group carpets for different age groups. So we have 4 small groups that meet in there. And then we have 2 TV cards and 2 speakers. And we just have a little panel board that runs sound for 2 mics and lights. And that's our elementary room. It's actually our simplest room. And we're very pleased how that came together. Preschool. We have pipe and drape in there, and we decided that we needed panels because preschoolers like to crawl, and then they hit the poles of the pipe and drape and just go everywhere in the room. So we also have certain wall panels that are up in there. We lay down flooring and carpet because they like to crawl, and then just supplying those rooms with toys and the nursery with nursery equipment. So again, I met with a lot of preschool people about those 2 rooms because the 2 past internships that I'd done were primarily in the elementary environment. So I didn't really know anything about babies or toddlers or all of the things that they need. So again, that was really helpful. After deciding on equipment, we placed that order, and that didn't come until 2 weeks before launch. So we didn't really get to touch that again until right before launch. So I spent probably the next month or so just focused on volunteers and curriculum. We do use Orange, which I have to say has been great, especially as a church. They supply everything. We purchased their preschool and elementary curriculum and all of the video resources for both of those. So again, they provide everything. We use their Lead Small app for curriculum. We use their social media plans, their take-home resources, all of their editable curriculum, which is great. We do edit some. We don't spend a lot of time editing curriculum, primarily because when you're a church plant, or really any church, you can't do everything and do it well. And that's just not something that right now we have the luxury of spending time on. And the Orange curriculum is great. We don't feel the need to edit it down that much. So most of the edits that we make are supplies oriented. That way we aren't just spending a lot of money on small group supplies.
I think that's a lot of people, right? Editing curriculum based on, we're not going to do that activity because it requires paint, or that one has food. By the way, too, before I let you continue, I should mention that we can link to in the show notes, like churchplant.com if somebody wants to check that out. And then even I get a question all the time about where we get our carpets for small group for kids. And you got the same ones, right? Just different color.
We did.
Yeah. So they're not cheap, but they're good. They're really good quality. And you are in a portable setting. You're going to pull them in and out every week. So we'll link to that too. Do you have pictures already of your environments? People might want to see that.
I do. I'd be glad to share those. And I can honestly just share our whole supply list from our order, and also just all the stuff that we had to individually purchase, because it takes you longer to find that stuff than you think it will, especially for a good price. So I'd be glad to share all of that.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. People love that, especially if they're starting something new. So it's a smart move that you don't spend a lot of time editing curriculum, I think. Now you do. Here's my question, and it can go a number of different ways, but what does your week look like now? Because you mentioned you use the Lead Small app, you do edit curriculum, you're doing social media from Orange. Like, do you do all of that? What is your time spent on every week now that this is a part-time role right now, and obviously as the church grows and things like that, it'll change. You help in other areas of the church, so there's that going on too, which I'm sure a lot of people listening can relate to. But what does your week look like?
Well, I wish I could say it's really organized and the same every week now that we launched the church, but it is not at all. It starts out, every week starts out pretty much the same. So I'm at the church for 6 hours on Sunday, get there at 6:30 every morning, and we set up. We have a volunteer service for our volunteers, which, because we only have one service right now, that's just a time where volunteers get to go in and experience the service. It's not public or advertised, but we all get to experience the service together. And then we go out to our respective places and run the service and then tear down. And then we head out. And on Sunday evening or Monday morning, I typically do a lot of stuff with our first-time guest process and follow-up. So as Nick mentioned, my role is part-time, but I also am like part-time admin for the church. So I do a lot Sunday evening and Monday morning for that. And then Monday morning, we have a 2.5 hour or so staff meeting. And then Monday afternoon is primarily emails, people follow up. That's when I schedule social media for the week. I'd like it to be farther out than that, but right now it is Monday the week of. And that's also when our parent update or email goes out that just lets parents know, hey, this is what your child's learning about or focusing on. Here are the resources from the curriculum so that you can continue the conversation at home. And just anything else significant that we're talking about that we want to communicate with parents. And then on Tuesday, I actually work another part-time job. So that's what I'm doing for the first half of the day. And then Tuesday through Thursday is primarily meeting with and communicating with volunteers. So I usually meet with at least one and then talk on the phone with several volunteers a week, just because right now there's a lot to communicate and clarify and plan for and figure out. And then I also do a good bit of stuff for social media and other communication stuff for the whole church during that time. Thursday is primarily extra projects and prep for Sunday. So developing certain things for volunteers, different processes, any of that extra stuff that we're building. And again, just trying to start, I usually work on Thursday. And then if I'm being totally honest, Saturday is also a lot of prep for Sunday. So I'm currently training some volunteers to help with like small group resources and large group stuff. But again, that all takes time. So a lot of it is me on Saturday night. I just finished packaging a few last minute things actually right before this conversation. Just being totally honest. So that's kind of what Saturday looks like. And then we'll roll into Sunday and start all over again.
Yep. And you're 2 months in, so you're still, I mean, obviously you got plenty of time to figure out your rhythm. I'll never forget when we launched the church, we had like these, we didn't have digital check-in. This was over a decade ago. And it existed, but we didn't have it then as a new young church. Didn't know what we were going to use. Had these name tags that were like reusable, like plastic, and you put the kid's name in there and all that stuff. And we're like making them and cutting them like literally midnight, I think, before we launched this new church.
Oh, yeah.
So I get that. And you're 2 months in, so you're still figuring out some of that. People listening can relate too, because there's definitely, I think most of us have tasks or jobs that we want to hand off that we haven't yet. You know what I mean? And so you do it. And a lot of times you do push it off till the end of the week because you just don't want to do it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So how about, one thing I think is unique is that you've started really well by trying to get coaches in place and and a leadership team. So let's talk about coaches, meaning volunteers who specifically lead other volunteers. Like that's part of their job. And some of yours might be dual role. I'm not really sure, but tell us what your coaches, who are they? What do they do? How did you get that going early? Because I know a lot of people are interested in putting that in their ministry.
Yeah, we started with coaches early, primarily for 3 reasons. So one was from working in 2 established churches prior. I saw the benefit that coaches had. I saw them brought on. I saw those systems implemented, and I saw just the huge value that they bring. And I really wanted that early on as we built the kids ministry. The second reason was I knew that I couldn't care for our 30 volunteers well on my own, especially when you're launching a church. There's so much that you're doing administratively and also big picture wise just to build that ministry. And I wanted those volunteers to be well cared for, because as everyone listening knows, when you're in kids ministry or really any ministry or area of the church, you are asking a lot of volunteers who work full-time jobs, are full-time parents, are working multiple jobs, and they are volunteering their time. And so you make a lot of asks of them. And the one thing is that with a launch team, it can be easy to take advantage of that and know that they are sold out to the church and the vision. But I think that when you assume that, oh, they're just sold out or they're not going to get tired, that's an assumption that eventually is no longer going to be true, because I think of one of the families who joined the launch team really early on. They get up early. They're there every Sunday. They have a 1-year-old and then a 3rd grader, and their 1-year-old does not go to sleep until 1 a.m. in the morning right now for the past several months. And they are there every Sunday, and they are sold out. But if they are not cared for and appreciated, and if someone doesn't notice that they're there and ask how they're doing, eventually they're going to start to feel not as appreciated, and when they're tired, they're not going to forget why they're there, but they just need to feel valued and cared for just like anyone else. So that's one of the other reasons, that I implemented coaches so early on. And the third reason is that I don't know everything. I'm constantly learning how much I don't know. And I think that the leaders on the kids ministry team can be better equipped and better served if they have leaders in place who have either been experienced in those roles or who are just really great at leadership and at caring for others. So in order to implement that, I started out with just one coach for elementary large group, because I think that small groups are key and they are the most important thing that we do, but large group, especially for a new church and for the elementary environment, helps make it irresistible, helps make it fun, and breaks down barriers for kids. And so we really wanted that experience to be great from the start. And my sister actually was a large group coach at CCC, and she came on the launch team. And so I invited her to do the same thing that she had been doing at CCC at United. And so she has just totally taken elementary large group and run with it. She's training new volunteers. She's running rehearsals. She's communicating with and caring for those volunteers. And that has been awesome, just to hand that off. She's done an incredible job with that. And then I guess it was during the 2 practice services that we had a lot of elementary small group leaders who had served in that same role prior to that, but we had a few new ones. And one of the more experienced elementary small group leaders started just circling up with all of them and talking about curriculum and best practices, because she knew that we had planned to do that and we're running into a bunch of problems with equipment. And as she did that, I was like, oh, I so want to ask her to be a coach, but she is currently a small group leader and we don't have anyone else to fill that position. And she actually came and approached me after that day and said, I'd love to be a coach for this team. I know that right now we have a need for small group leaders and that I would have to do both at the same time, and that that's not ideal, but I would love to mentor these volunteers. And so she's currently doing both roles right now. We met for coffee that week and talked through what that would look like and what the expectations and just different parts of her role would be, since it looks a little different when you're a small group leader and a coach. You can't be over that room totally on Sunday morning and helping those small group leaders because you've got a group of your own. But we talked through that. She's done an awesome job. And our next goal is to get someone to replace her so that she can just coach full time because she's done a great job with that. And then we recently started with a preschool coach as well. So it's just someone who rose up in the preschool room and really ran point with everything in that room. She's in there every week. She is really good with building into those volunteers and organizing that room. And so I met with her as well, I think the following week, and she started in that role. And that's just been so helpful. They've done an awesome job leading those volunteers. I'm really, really grateful that we've been able to do that so early on.
Does the preschool person also double up, like coach, and then also kind of lead in the room too, or no?
She does. I think her role is she honestly probably coaches and doesn't have to lead as much as our elementary small group coach, because there are a lot of leaders in the preschool room and they're not all sectioned off into different groups. They do split up into 2 groups right now they have like a social playtime and then like a very short, large group teaching time. And then afterwards, when they do an activity, they split up based on their ages, like 3, 4, and then the older 4s and 5s. But aside from that, they're all in there at once. And we have that room. People really love preschoolers and want to serve there. So we've onboarded some new volunteers and they've all wanted to serve in that room. So she's really been able to step back and just lead and coach that room. She was out for 3 weeks because her daughter was sick, and then she was running an event. And that room ran totally fine without her because she'd set those leaders up really well. But you can definitely feel it, like you start to feel it after a few weeks because, again, she's leading those people. She's just making sure that they're focusing on communicating and partnering with parents as their parents drop them off and pick them up. And you can feel it when they're not there, but she's also done a great job setting those leaders up for when she's not there.
That's great. I get that question a lot, like can coaches, double up? And the answer is some, not many usually, but some, and it's better than, in some ways, especially early, if it's temporary, it's better than not having them. And you can kind of do like you're doing with your elementary coach too, where it's like, well, let's get you in this role and then let's make one of our priorities to replace you. And together, maybe we can replace you within a couple months or something like that. What about a leadership team? That was something that you wanted to put in place early on. That was something I mentioned that we did, but we didn't do it when we started. I wish we'd done it when we started. And before we started, it came probably a year, maybe even 2 years in. But again, I know that's something a lot of people would love to have and they don't. What does that look like for you? How'd you get it started? Who's on it? What do they do?
Yeah, the leadership team, we started, I guess that concept kind of started when I had talked to you. You had mentioned the leadership team was really helpful. And then our lead pastor recommended prior to our launch, just trying to get together a group of people who could be a part of helping make decisions, who could be developed as leaders as the ministry grew, and just to kind of help support and communicate and defend the vision. So it wasn't just me, because at the beginning in a church plant, it is typically just one person on staff who's focused on kids ministry. Whereas when you're in a larger church, there's multiple people supporting and you can talk and collaborate together during the week. And when you're in church plant, it's just you. So it's really easy to just make all the decisions yourself. But I didn't want to make all the decisions by myself. I don't think that our ministry would have been served as well if I was just doing that. It's really helpful to bring in other perspectives and people who have been in different roles before. So that's kind of the why behind why we started that. So I reached out to a few people who served in different areas of children's ministry, some coaches, some people who I knew would potentially be a coach, and then just some people who I thought would lend a really great voice and perspective to that team. So it started with myself and 3 other people, one who was serving in the guest services area, my sister who was the large group coach, and then one of our elementary small group leaders who was a guy, because I didn't want it to just be all women speaking into the leadership team. And he's been great. He's been an awesome voice on that. So I invited them. I just personally had a conversation with them and kind of told them about the leadership team, what the goal was of it, that I wanted us to try to meet once a month, which is really ambitious, but I figured with Thanksgiving and Christmas, there'd be a few months of the year where we maybe didn't meet. And so we talked about how we'd meet once a year, that we wanted to learn together, that we wanted to consistently talk and ask questions like, where are we winning? What can we be doing better? What are we doing that's not pointing towards our vision that maybe we could eliminate? And then what's missing and how can we grow this ministry? Those were kind of the 5 questions that when I pitched the idea to them, that I said, I want our leadership team to be consistently focusing on this. So the 4 of us met in September for the first time pre-launch. Our first meeting was primarily about building trust and building culture. So we focused a lot on getting to know one another. It was great to hear people's stories. So we talked about 2 questions. We asked, how did you get involved with United? Which was really interesting because even though I had been on a launch team with these people and talking with them for months, I didn't know all of their stories. So that was really great to hear. And then also asking, why are you passionate about kids ministry? So knowing each person's individual heart behind why they'd chosen to serve in kids ministry. And then we talked about, again, we reviewed the vision of the leadership team, and then we started talking through different values. So what did we want to be known for? What was essential for this kids ministry? Knowing we can't do all of it now, but what kind of ministry do we want to build? And we used actually a podcast as a springboard for that conversation. So Orange has the Think Orange podcast, and we listened to the first episode of that actually where Reggie Joyner kind of sets up the whole strategy of Orange and the idea that 2 combined influences are greater than 2 separate influences. And so we talked about the church and the family partnering together, and coming out of that, what as a kids ministry did we want to value? And then by the second meeting, we had introduced those 2 other coaches into their roles. And so I invited them to be a part of that as well. And we met I think it was 2 weeks ago. So we had gone through several weeks of United post launch, and we just shared wins. We talked about where we're seeing gaps, and then we primarily talked about partnering with parents. So because that's a huge value for us, but it can be really easy to kind of slip to the side as you're launching a church. We just talked about where do we feel like we're doing well with that, and what gaps are we seeing there? And the primary thing that we talked about was how we don't feel like parents know that small group leaders are there as a resource to them. And so we talked about how we can equip small group leaders better and how we can communicate that model better to parents who are coming in thinking that those leaders are just childcare workers or teachers, but not that they're a consistent person that's going to be there every week for their child and is also there for them. And then it was a very long meeting. We also talked about volunteer onboarding because right now we're trying to recruit a bunch of volunteers. So I just asked them for some feedback on, hey, how do you feel like your onboarding experience was? Even though it was really fast. And as a volunteer, like as you've served in roles in other churches, what did you appreciate about your onboarding experience? And how can we make onboarding a great experience for people who are coming on the team at United?
Cool. So you obviously talked through a lot with them, which is really good. And I think your point is very true that you can, because even when your church is a little larger, 500, 600, sometimes you're the only staff person in that area, even 800 to 1,000 sometimes, depending on what ministry you lead and all that. Mm-hmm. But you don't want to do it alone. Just like you said, you don't want to make all the decisions. You need other input. I remember when I was married the whole time we launched the church, but we didn't have kids. So it was great having parents too on our leadership team.
Yes, that's been great.
to get that perspective, which is huge. So that's smart. You've started it really well with coaches and with leaders. Let's end it with this. What surprised you? I mean, you were pretty well prepared, having come from 2 churches. Did an internship at Gwinnett. You were at our church, obviously not a church plant anymore, but we were. And so you got to ask a lot of questions. We were part of planting churches, so there's networks of other churches that had started. And I don't even remember if you talked to them too. But so you were pretty well prepared. But what surprised you?
I'm trying to think. A lot of people have asked me this question, and usually they ask it and then they say, has it surprised you how hard it is? And that was not surprising to me because having worked in a church before, it's already hard, and I just knew a church plant's probably harder. And so that wasn't surprising. I think, two things. One is just, it's little, but it's huge. Being portable and not having your own facility and environment is huge. You have to think about everything because you're only in the building for 6 hours a week. You can't go there in the middle of the week. You can invite volunteers to meet there, to prep resources, or to rehearse, or just to gather together. You just got to think about so many logistics. And so I will never take for granted having a building again. That has definitely been huge. And then I think the other thing that has surprised me would relate to volunteers. Two things. One, I had never been in a position before where I was directly responsible for the volunteers in the kids ministry. And so I didn't know what that would be like. And I've learned that I love leading volunteers and caring for them and developing systems and bringing on coaches. That's been a great experience. And I think I've also been surprised by how much the volunteers want to be there. I'm a person who hesitates to make asks of people because I never want to ask too much of someone, but I'm also learning that you can never say no for people, because our launch team and even the volunteers who have come on since we started the church have just been so excited to be a part of the team and to do different things. I'm always learning like randomly about the talents or different things that our volunteers have. And I'm like, I'm going to remember that. We have, trying to think, we have people who are great at building things and someone who can print signs at their work for free, and just people who are volunteering and so excited about what's happening at United. And I guess that shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. I think God called an incredible group of people to be a part of United and to get excited about what God's doing in Owings Mills. And again, that shouldn't have surprised me, but every Sunday and really every day, it constantly does.
That's great. Well, you all are doing a great work out there, which is just awesome. That area has needed a church, needs multiple churches probably for a long time, which is a really good thing. How can people connect with you if they have questions? We'll share a lot of links and notes and stuff in the show notes, but how can they connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk with anyone, answer questions, steal all of your ideas too, because I'm sure you guys are all doing awesome things. But you can connect with me. I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. We'll put a link in the show notes. My name is very common and difficult to find on Facebook. Or you can email me. I'm on email probably way too often. Rachel@unitedchurchmd.org. And again, we can put that in the show notes. But yeah, I'd love to connect with anyone and answer any questions.
You know your name is popular when like somebody already has the domain name with your middle initial, right? Like,
oh, definitely. Yeah. And multiple numbers. It's bad.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Rachel, you're doing a great job there. And obviously you started really well. And I'm just so excited to see what's going to come of United Church. Thanks for coming on the podcast, kind of stepping out from behind the curtain and the work you do that nobody sees with the podcast, and being on stage here for a little bit just to share with us and help us learn from your launch experience, which you kind of probably will forget in some ways. You'll remember some things, but you'll forget a lot of it. So I'm glad we got to talk about it now while it's fresh in your mind. But thanks for coming on.
Yep. Thanks for having me. And thanks for everything you're doing, Nick, to help resource leaders. I know I have benefited so much from learning and grabbing all the resources off your site too as we started. So thanks for all you're doing. It's making a difference.
I appreciate that. I hope so. That's the whole goal, right? All right. Well, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rachel's a sharp leader, isn't she? I mean, just think, she's 21 years old, and no, you can't hire her. I mean, that's not from my church, obviously. I was sad to see that she wasn't going to be able to be part of our team because she was interested in starting this new ministry in a new church, which is what we're all about. So I'm kingdom-minded, except if you try to hire her away. You know, my kingdom-mindedness definitely has limits. But I'm excited to see what they're doing there. Our church is so excited to see what their church is doing just on the other side of town, making a huge impact there in just their first few months, which is pretty amazing. If you want to think of some action items coming out of this interview, 2 easy ones, well, not easy to do, but easy ones to point out, are recruiting a coach. If you don't have that in your ministry, if you don't have coaches or somebody else that's sharing the leadership load with you, recruit a coach. Maybe the way she talked about, get somebody who'll serve dual role and then help replace themselves, or maybe it's somebody who's going to be able to already jump into that. Maybe it's somebody that leads somewhere else in their ministry. Maybe it's someone from outside your ministry who may not ever have thought about serving in children's ministry or youth ministry, with kids and with students, but you can get them to help lead and pour into and invest in other adults. Another one is to start a leadership team. If you don't have a leadership team, even if you are a larger church with multiple staff, it's a great thing to have your leaders have leadership teams of volunteers. That's a big deal. If you are launching something, of course, you'll want to get all the links in the show notes at nickblevins.com/episode 81. That will be helpful to you as you start something new. You definitely want to check that out. And before I sign off, just a reminder, if you serve in youth ministry, check out Terrace Crawford coaching at youthmencoaching.com. He and David Olshine are offering a one-on-one coaching plus as a group, for a year next year in 2018, but you have to sign up by mid-December. So if you're in youth ministry, you might want to check that out. Again, I just think coaching is one of the greatest ways to grow as a leader. It's an investment for sure, but it's an investment in yourself that pays off in big ways. So hope you have a great week, and I'll catch you next time on the Family Ministry Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Nick Blevins Family Ministry Podcast. We hope this helps you maximize your church's potential. We would love to hear stories of how you apply what you've learned. You can do that by leaving a comment on iTunes or in the show notes at nickblevins.com.